Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host,
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, and before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so we are here. We are back again with another off-season review, and last time we did the two NBA finalists, the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Indiana Pacers. This time, we're going to focus on conference finalists, New York Knicks, as well as the Minnesota Timberwolves. We'll start with the New York Knicks from the eastern side of the bracket this time around. And the Knicks, it's kind of funny, the discussion about this team, because last year, right, they went 51-31. They were the 3 seed. They ended up going to the conference finals for the first time in, I believe, 25 years? And, going into the series, there were a lot of people who picked the Pacers to win, but I think the Knicks were viewed as the series favorite. Given the fact that they took out the Celtics, right, which was kind of their main foe, their biggest foe, that was kind of who they constructed their team to beat. And then they beat the Celtics, right? But then, unfortunately, they ran into the Indiana Pacers, and it didn't work out for them. They ended up losing in 6. It's funny because I remember we picked the Knicks to win in 6 in that series, and I remember game 1 happened, and you were just kind of in disbelief at the fact that the Knicks controlled most of that game. They were up, 18 or whatever they were in the fourth quarter with Brunson in foul trouble. And then from there on out, everything that could go wrong went wrong, right? Like Aaron Nesmith turned into a flamethrower. Tyrese Halliburton, of course, hit the big shot to tie it up to send it into overtime. The Knicks lost in overtime, so they still had an extra chance to win that game. And, a lot of people mentioned that they felt like that they lost that series after the first game. I mean, it's not like the series is over, obviously, because you still could have won 4 other games, but they just weren't able to. But the Pacers were better in that series, and the Knicks defensively just weren't able to slow down the Pacers' offense. And then even on the offensive end, there were just certain angles, certain performances that you just didn't necessarily get quite as much of. For the most part, Brunson was really good in that series, as was Towns, right? He had I think Towns had maybe one kind of mediocre game, right? Mm-hmm. But for most of that series, he played pretty well. So your 2 stars played well. You did get some up and down performances from some of your other guys. Like OG Anunoby didn't shoot that great from 3, but overall, your main starters played well. Hart was the guy that definitely did struggle. He shot 18% from 3, and that's a guy that we talked about where he's kind of a swing piece for them, where his 3-point shot is a big part of how teams guard him, because they don't really guard him from 3, and if he knocks it down, it makes him a completely, it changes how effective he can really be, because we know he's a great rebounder. He's a hustle guy. He just didn't have it in that series, and I think he recently had surgery, so maybe there was an injury he was playing through. And then you also had Mitchell Robinson, right, who kind of reestablished himself as a real guy in that rotation, where he was so pivotal to what the Knicks were doing. I mean, they were forced into changing the starting 5, where he's the 5 and Towns is at the 4. That was a lineup that we thought could potentially be the lineup when he came back, right? Because he wasn't able to start for the Knicks for most of that season because he was recovering from injuries. And so after you go on from that point, they fired Tibbs, right, who overall did a really good job coaching the team, right? They got better every year. They were consistently, one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. But at the end of the day, it seemed like that they kind of just fell out of favor in terms of a lot of the players. It seemed like just kind of stopped listening to him consistently. And when that happens, right, then you kind of have to replace the coach eventually, even though you felt like he did a good job. But they replaced him with Mike Brown, right, the former Kings head coach. He's been around the block with a number of teams. So I am curious to see how much of a difference does it make. Could it be one of those things where maybe it's a lateral move, or could it be maybe one of those coaching moves that puts you over the top? We'll have to see. Offensively, he did a very good job with the Kings, because prior to the Kings stint, he was known mainly as a defensive coach, right? So now we'll see if he can optimize and get maybe the best version of the Knicks, on both ends of the floor, right? Because, defensively, they weren't great early on in the season, but they got better. And then defensively, they were great against Boston. And then, against the Pacers, it kind of reared its ugly head. I think some of that is also just the personnel, because when you look at their starting 5, I mean, you do have Towns, you do have Brunson. Those aren't great defenders, but you can mix and match. They weren't very deep, though. So that's kind of your issue there. But I think it's, for what he is, It's a solid hire. It's just a matter of how much better can he make them. But then you also have to couple that with the offseason moves they made, right? They signed Guerschon Yabusele and they signed Jordan Clarkson. And those are really the main moves that they made because everything else, right, they basically just ran it back, which is fine because they went to the conference finals. They were 2 wins away from an NBA final, so you don't really need to break it up. You're mainly looking at it from a perspective of you added a couple of guys to help you off your bench, right? Including a guy in Yabusele, right, who plays a position that the Knicks didn't really have a lot of, right? They didn't really have a lot of guys who are fours. If anything, actually, really, they didn't have any, right? Because guys like OG Anunoby and Josh Hart, like, yeah, in a smaller lineup, you'll see a lot of times they'll play the 4, but they're not natural 4s, right? They're really more so like wings, 3s, right? Like maybe you could say they're 3-4s, but they're not, ideally you don't want them as much at the 4 like all the time. Now you have a guy in Yabusele who is a natural 4, and he can also space the floor. He had a really good year for the Sixers last year, right? Because he actually, funny enough, right? Remember, he was drafted by Boston way back when, played a couple seasons, and just never really was able to get consistent minutes. And then he was overseas, out of the league, and played really well. Obviously, we saw him in the Olympics, right? He was on the French team. He played great. He was one of their best players. And he was able to turn that plus his overseas work into a deal with Philly. And he averaged 11 and 6 for them last year with 2 assists a game, 50 from the field, 38 from 3. And that was the key because in his initial stint as a Celtic, he couldn't really shoot threes. He didn't really have an outside shot. But now he's a much more complete player on that end of the floor. And now he'll be able to take that to the Knicks, right, and give them a bigger physical guy that also has some skill. I'm curious to see if they have any small ball lineups with him at the 5. It'd be interesting to see. But I think the main thing here is that you can play him at the 4 and just make yourself have more versatile lineups, have a little bit more size out there without sacrificing shooting, and against some of the bigger teams, help you out defensively too. Because, you'd like to have some lineups where, you don't necessarily have to play mostly smaller guys all the time at every position. So now you're in a better spot. And then the other factor is with the East being weaker than it was, right? Because no more Celtics for this season and no more Indiana Pacers for this season, right? Because both of their main guys have season-ending injuries. Like maybe Tatum comes back. Some people have opened the door for that. But with the roster having changed so much, I still don't see that Celtics team, even if he comes back early, I don't see them being able to make a feasible run this year, right? I think they're kind of having a gap year. They save some money. So really, in the Eastern Conference, you're kind of looking at the Knicks continuing to be one of those top spots in the Eastern Conference, and I do think they got better. So I'd give them a B+. If you want, you could bump it up to an A-, because again, there really wasn't a whole lot that they were going to do that was going to drastically shape the roster outside of a coaching hire, which is, more of a, not really a personnel move. That's a, different move altogether. That could be a change in strategy and how you use different players. And then they added a couple bench guys. Clarkson, I don't know. I mean, he's been playing in Utah for a while now, right? He's actually, an older guy at this point. He's in his, 30s after being a guy where, you kind of just envision him as like a young player for a really long time. But now he's at 33. So he'll be, I guess, 34 by the end of the season. I mean, you look at his numbers in Utah, he's been consistently giving you like 15 plus a game as a member of the Utah Jazz. But, he hasn't really shot the 3 ball all that well. Again, the Jazz aren't a very good team. So you could just make the case, well, he's just taking a lot of difficult shots on a team that doesn't have a lot of great offensive players, right? I think there's a strong case to be made for that. And he's like a backup guard anyways, right? He's like a 6th man guy you bring off the bench to help give you some offense. And they didn't really have that last year unless, say like a Miles McBride gets hot, right? Like outside of that, you really didn't have anybody else who could really give you some helpful production off the bench. Now you have 2 of those guys with McBride, and then you can figure out what you're going to do. Like, do you start Mitchell Robinson? Do you start Josh Hart? I'm not sure which direction that Mike Brown is going to go in, but you have options. So I think that this Knicks team is set to continue to be one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference, in the league. And if things go their way, as long as they can be a top 2-3 seed, which I don't see why they shouldn't be, right? They still have a good chance of making the finals because you look at the rest of the East and what teams have made moves to get themselves to catch up to the Knicks, right? Like maybe you could look at a team like Orlando, maybe you could look at a team like Atlanta, and those teams, I think could match up very well against the Knicks. But we need to see more from Orlando because, as of right now, right, because they're a younger team, we need to see more of that pan out. The Hawks could also, because they have Trae Young and some other guys to pair with him, that could be a real threat as well. But the Knicks just feel, a little bit more trustworthy, I guess, just because we've seen more of them. But I think if those teams, whatever the best versions of those are, they could be teams that could beat New York. But as of right now, I think for the Knicks, I think you handled this offseason well. You did what you needed to do. Like I said, just add a few more guys. And then I guess they felt like they needed to change the coach, bring in a different voice. That's fine, because Mike Brown, I don't feel like is a significant change from Tibbs. Like, I don't feel like it's a downgrade. I don't feel like if you think it's an upgrade, it's not that much different, but it's a different voice and that will help. So I like everything that they did. So I'd give them a B plus.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you on that one. I think, they had a awkward situation financially, right? They couldn't really do like too much. And I think that's why I give them a lot of credit and leeway, where it's due. But I think the first thing that we do have to talk about is their bench last year, like bottom in bench points. Like it wasn't even remotely close, right? They averaged 21.7 points per game off the bench, and the next worst was the Lakers, 26.2. So you can clearly see that there is a very, very bad discrepancy in terms of, how bad the bench was last year. So bringing in Yabusele and Jordan Clarkson are definitely home run moves, and I think the Yabusele one is the one that I'm 100% higher on because of the contract, because of the fit.
Yeah.
It allows New York to also play like double big more often as well. So that should be really, really fun to look out for. And I think he's going to fit in, with what they really want to do.
Mm-hmm.
As a team and what their identity is, right? He's going to help out Brunson a ton. It's going to be amazing. Defensively, he's not, a hindrance or anything like that. So I love it. I love everything that they've done. Mike Brown, I think that's a great addition as well. Not too much of a significant upgrade like you talked about from Tibbs, but I think we're going to see a different version of this Knicks team where it might feel a little bit more polished and put together, and I think that's kind of the thing that they've been missing. Because I think the problem was last year they were a little bit too easy to figure out, especially down the stretch. But now I think they have a little bit more versatility, especially off the bench. You can give guys a little bit of a breather, so it should be cool. And I think the cool part about Yabusele is like he's pretty good, actually. Very, very underrated in terms of a player, right? I know he kind of recently resurfaced and came back on the map and on the grid, but I mean, he can kind of replicate what Towns can do. So if Towns needs a breather because of foul trouble, which we know will happen, then I think, Yabusele being out there with a guy like Mitchell Robinson is going to be amazing in best case scenario for the Knicks. So, I would say it's a home run for them. But, it was best available too, right? Like, it's not like, they got like the top free agents in this class or anything like that, but they did do significant upgrades, which is what they needed, especially on the bench.
Yeah, because you have to look at that team, and as I said, they were 2 wins away from a finals trip.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe they don't beat Oklahoma City, but it's not like this was a bad team that had a horrible year, right? Like, I mean, of course, going into that Celtics series, right? No one really had them winning that series. I know you had them doing that because that was your championship pick, but just
Right.
as a whole, they were massive underdogs going into that playoff series. So, it's not nothing. And I know that the Celtics shot like garbage. I know there were guys that were hurt or whatever, but like still, even despite all of that, everybody thought that the Celtics were going to win that series. So I think it's a clear sign that the Knicks are continuing to improve. And like you said, for Mike Brown, can he kind of shore up some of that offense? Because like you said, the offense, like you said, started to become too easy to figure out, very stale, not that creative. And some of that is like just how some of those guys play, right? Like Brunson is a guy who likes to play in the pick and roll, has his post up areas of the floor that he likes to operate in, pull ups and everything like that. But we know they have some really good offensive players. Like they have other, like, other than Towns and Brunson, like, those guys can have nights where they have big scoring nights. So can they figure out ways to continue to use their talents a little bit more effectively, right? Maybe a little bit more ball movement, maybe a little bit more cutting and screening and extra secondary actions. Again, of course, it's all dependent on health and all that, and how much those guys can adapt their game. But I think most of those players are pretty adaptable, right? Like we saw Towns, right? Come in, play a significant role for the Knicks, right? And he had probably the best season of his career, right? Unless you kind of count a previous season just as a whole. I think he showed a lot. Of course, not a perfect player by any means because of the defense, but I like everything that the Knicks have done. I guess the question is, they were your pick to
Mm.
win the title last year. So how much different do you feel about them this time around? Right? Like, are you still kind of picking them? Maybe this time they'll win the championship. Or do you think they'll come out of the East, or what do you
I
think?
mean, the off season's not over yet, so I don't want to
Right.
jump the gun. But
Oh yeah, they still have. I think they have 12. They have 12 players right now, so there's still other players to sign.
yeah,
I think they'll probably bring back at least one of the guys who
mhm.
was already on the team last year. Like I could see like a Shamit coming back, or maybe somebody else. I mean, most of the guys left in free agency at this point. I mean, some of them are waiting. Could be Brogdon, could be Simmons, could be probably not Westbrook, but like just as a whole, there's not like but so many guys left, but still.
Yeah, I mean, like it's a good point because I think their chances are going to be better this year in terms of getting to the finals for sure. Because, like you said, the East is a little bit more wide open. Sure, the Hawks could take them to 7 or something like that. But I feel like Cleveland and New York are probably top dogs in the Eastern Conference at this point. So, like you said, without Boston in the play, without Indiana potentially in the play, then I think if you are picking the Knicks, then you'd feel 100% better than you did last year because last year felt a little bit magical and a little bit lucky. But this year, I think you're probably going to feel a lot better. Then you have all the guys will have a year under their belt. So the chemistry might look a little bit better. Granted, different coach, but I think the chances would be higher for sure. I'm not gonna pick them outright, like right here and now, but I would say if I were picking them, I'd feel better about that pick now than I did last year.
Yeah, I think the difference is definitely now, like, you probably need the Knicks to be in the tier one because we haven't even done like an Eastern Conference tier. I know we did that with the Western Conference, but like the Eastern Conference tiers, we haven't really done.
Mm.
But I feel like you kind of need the Knicks in that tier one spot. Like, you can put Cleveland there because they were great in the regular season last year, and I'm sure they'll be great again in the regular season this year, right? So those two teams I think should be in tier one,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then after that, how do you feel about some of these other teams? Like, should they be tier ones? Do they need to do a little bit more? Like, I can't, as much as, we'll get to the Magic later, this offseason, but, as much as I like what they did, I don't feel comfortable putting them in tier one when I
No,
haven't seen,
no, they're tier
when I
two.
haven't seen enough. Yeah, when I haven't seen enough of them yet, right? Like the Hawks, I think, again, we like everything they did this offseason, but I still need to see more of that in action. And, there's still questions about them, from a health standpoint of some of these guys and, what some of these guys will actually look like going into next season. But I think the Knicks are one of the safest picks, I think, in the Eastern Conference. But anything and everything can happen because the Celtics seem like a safe pick to get to the conference finals, and that didn't happen. Even Cleveland, right? I think everybody kind of thought that they'd make the conference finals. That didn't happen either.
Mhm.
So, you got to be ready in the Eastern Conference for something stupid to happen.
Pretty much.
Because it will. Yeah, because it will. But I
Yeah,
think,
look at Philly
yeah,
every year, man.
yeah, but I think the Knicks are primed to be once again one of the best teams in the
I
East.
would pick them to come out of the East. Like I'll do that right now. Like I can pick them to
Yeah,
come
and
out
then
of the East right now.
yeah, and I guess the other thing that I think was cool, was good to see, was again like Mitchell Robinson, like being a real guy in the playoffs, where like teams could not, teams did not want him out there on the floor whenever he was out there. Like they had to find ways to get him out of there, right? Like whether or not it was intentionally fouling and sending him to the free throw line, or whatever, right? And that was good to see because that was a guy. Because I think, even though I didn't have the Knicks coming out of the East, I think both you and I were high on that Knicks team. I think we both liked what they did and thought that they were going to be really good. And I think one of the things that we were super curious about was that double big line, but we didn't see a whole lot of it until the latter part of the season. And then once we got to see it, looked pretty good, right? It kind of looked like what you were kind of thinking, where it's like, all right, Mitchell Robinson can get you a bunch of offensive rebounds and protect the paint, and move around, and then Towns, of course, can do what he normally does: space the floor, get downhill, and everything else. So, like I said, a lot to like. The other question is do we see any of those young guys that they drafted last year? Could any of those guys be rotational pieces next season this upcoming season? Because we didn't really see much of those guys aside from garbage time or if guys were really hurt. So we're looking at what Tyler Kolek,
And Dadier?
Huck Porty, Huck Porty and Dadier.
Yeah.
So could any of those guys could they potentially get minutes, or are they probably more likely to be third string guys again?
I'm hoping that we get to see some Kolek minutes, but I mean, I think that's a little optimistic, just considering where he was drafted. I don't know. The roster I feel like they need him though. I need a guy of that archetype, but we'll see. It's kind of on him to develop, or the team to develop him into what they really need. Dadier would be interesting too, because I think he's more of like a wing, right?
Right.
Yeah, he's more.
Yeah.
And I think wing depth could help this team as well. So I would hope that some of those guys take a leap. I mean, Summer League, they weren't horrible. I mean, they showed a little bit of promise, nothing like to really report on, but possible.
Yeah, it would be interesting just because, off the bench, when you look at what they have, it's aside from Yabusele, it's mostly guards. And it's like, McBride, do you really want him to be the backup point guard? Or would it be nice to kind of have him as like a secondary ball handler, and then he can kind of focus a little bit more on defending and shooting and whatnot? But again, they only have 12. They still have multiple roster spots, so some of that, like you said, in fairness, could be figured out if they add another guy. Of the potential free agents available right now, is there anybody that you're kind of eyeing where you're thinking like the Knicks should consider going after this guy? Because it feels like some of these guys are kind of locked into where they're probably going to go, but they're just kind of waiting for something to happen. Like we know that Horford and Melton will probably go to Golden State, but they're waiting on the Kuminga situation because that hasn't been figured out yet. But, is there anyone else of the available free agents? Again, not a whole lot of guys left, but let's say like in terms of players, just a handful of guys to mention, like Malcolm Brogdon, Chris Boucher, Trey Lyles, I guess Achua, is a free agent. So could they just bring him back? Russ, I don't think goes here. I think he goes elsewhere. A lot of people have mentioned Sacramento, but who knows? And then after that, it gets pretty dark. So, I don't know what they're going to do there. Maybe they bring back DeLon Wright or Cameron Payne. I don't know. But, from the main guys that I mentioned at the top of that list, would any of those guys interest you? Like if you're the Knicks?
Brogdon for sure. That gives you more point guard depth, and he's more of a true point guard than Jordan Clarkson, right? Clarkson plays more of kind of like a two, right? Very, very offensive minded, but Brogdon can give you a little bit of both, and I think that could potentially help, especially in a lineup where you could have Deuce McBride and Malcolm Brogdon, coming off the bench. And I would also say Precious Achua too, because I think wing and big man depth will definitely help this team in the long run. So, either of those two guys, I would be content with that. But even then, even if they don't get those guys, I think they still had a great offseason.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You're kind of adding and kind of filling in the rest of your rotation with other guys. And that's the spot that you want to be in. You don't want to be in the spot where like we have to hope and pray that, we get so and so or else we're kind of screwed over, right? You don't really want to be in that spot. And I don't think they're in that spot. But I think if they get some of those guys, I think that would definitely help their team out a ton.
Yeah.
So, anything else you want to add with the Knicks?
No, not really. I just hope that they have a great season, because I'm not gonna lie, having New York basketball back in this form definitely was very, very fun for, I think, the NBA as a whole, and especially us covering it. It was really phenomenal to watch, and it felt amazing.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's good to see, like you said, that the Knicks are back to being a relevant contending team that does have a legitimate chance to come out of the East, and if you can come out of the conference, you have a real shot at winning the title. It's just a matter of what are the odds that they can come out of the East and then beat whoever comes out of the Western Conference, because it does.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, because it feels like Oklahoma City may just be a bad matchup for them. And then after that, right, can they feel good about some of those? Because they played all right against some of the other, like they beat the mess out of Denver in the regular season. Now, of course, regular season, as we've learned, starts to mean less and less once we get into the playoffs, because the Knicks did horrible against all the top teams, and then they still got to the conference finals. But I guess that would be the main question: is like the Knicks can come out of the East. Do they have a good shot at being able to actually beat whoever comes out of the West? I mean, again, you always have a shot. Like, I don't think that they're like just a team where it's like, oh, they're automatically a lock to get swept. Like, like even a team like Indiana, right? Like, everybody thought they were going to get creamed. Then they took Oklahoma City to 7. But I would say the Knicks have a chance. I don't think they would probably be favored against, any of those Western Conference teams. But if it's not Oklahoma City, then I would say that they have like a decent shot. Like, I would actually give them a legitimate shot to beat the non-Oklahoma City teams.
Yeah, and I wanted to shout out Brunson too, because
Yeah,
none of this is freaking possible without him on the court
right.
and off the court financially with that beautiful contract and pay cut that he took. So shout out to him.
Oh yeah, for sure. He before he got hurt, right? He was a potential MVP candidate, right? He ended up playing. I think he played 65 games last year. So what? He just barely made. He just barely made it in. If he had missed like a few more games, I think he wouldn't have got in.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a great season last year, right? When he was healthy. 26-7, almost 50-40. Right, so great efficiency, and again, like in the playoffs, like I know that it ended badly for the Knicks, and I know people mentioned like he got picked on defensively, Towns got picked on defensively, but Brunson was awesome, right? Like I don't think you really look at him as like one of the main reasons why you lost that series,
Oh,
right?
the reason they
Of
got
course,
there.
right. So not really concerned about him in any way, shape, or form, as long as he's healthy. So hopefully he and like that was like a freak injury last year, right? That was the Laker game where he turned his ankle, late in the game, and then he was out for most of the remainder of that season. So the other question is, so I think Mikal Bridges, right, has an extension, or he's going to be extension eligible coming up relatively soon.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, that hasn't happened yet, right? And I know that when Brunson took that discount, they didn't mention Bridges, but like at the time when he did it, like you said, it gave the Knicks more financial flexibility to potentially keep all these guys together, right? Because OG's on a huge contract. Towns was already on a big deal. He hasn't had an extension, but he's on a big deal. And then you got Hart, who was on an extension, and then Bridges is kind of like the lone guy I think that has to be re-signed relatively soon. So what do we think happens there? Because they gave up a lot to get him. I think there were moments and stretches in the playoffs where he did help them a ton. He was great in the Celtics series.
Mm-hmm.
And there were other moments where you felt a little bit underwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
But, given what we've seen from so many of these teams recently with the new CBA, like, do you anticipate that he gets it?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think they can stay under the second apron. I don't think they're probably going to extend Towns when that time comes. So that's I think what I expect. I think they can extend Bridges and stay under the second apron.
Yeah, and I believe it's what, like, a $150 million extension. So, like you said, I think there's other things they could do. Like, worst case scenario, they could be like, yeah, maybe we'll move Hart. Maybe we'll move, McBride or, some other guy or something like that. But, as long as he continues to play well, he'll probably get it. Now, maybe it's like a scenario where it's like he goes into free agency and then it's not an extension and he gets re-signed or something like that. But we'll see. I do think that the Knicks will continue to try to improve. So they're going to keep their options open. So if there's just making something up, if there's like a situation where, like a Giannis or somebody's available, then yeah, all bets are off. But, if that's not the case, right, and you have this team as is, right, 4-year, $156 million extension, right, then outside of the Giannis thing, then yeah, he'll probably get it. But, we'll see. Because again, we've seen some of these teams make some different situations in terms of like how they've kind of figured out how to manage their finances. We've seen some changes, right? Because like we saw like Denver, right? They moved Michael Porter Jr. after winning a title a couple seasons ago because you couldn't afford to keep him anymore, and then they ended up cutting costs so much that now they're under the first apron. So
Yeah, exactly.
yes, yeah. So you anticipate that he signs the extension?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think that'll be an issue at all.
Yeah, I think yeah, and like it wouldn't be, and like to be honest, it doesn't have to be 150. It could be less. Like it could be like 140 or 130 or something like that. So I think he can still sign it.
Hmm.
As long as they continue to win and as long as he continues to play well, like I think I don't think it would be a shocker. If I don't think it would be shocking if they don't give it to him, but I would lean towards I think he gets it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so then I guess last but not least to kind of close up this Knicks conversation, over under 52 and a half. So last year they were 51 and 31. So the question is do we think they can be as good or better than last year standings wise?
Over. That's an easy over for me. Um, they're getting deeper with the bench. Like I said, it'll be a year for the guys, under their belt or whatever. So, more experience together, more chemistry, different coach, different style. But I still think it will contribute to wins. And the East overall is just sorrier than it was last year. So I expect them to rise in the standings.
Yeah, I can go over too. It probably won't be that much more, just
Mm-hmm.
because then if it's a lot more, then you're starting to veer towards 60 wins. I don't know if they're going to get to 60 wins, but I guess somebody's going to have to win a bunch of games in the Eastern Conference. And like you said, the bottom of the East being worse more than likely, right? That's going to help them. Now the West got better, so maybe they're not going to be able to get as many Western Conference. And in fairness, there were some Eastern Conference teams that got better, right? So like maybe like say Orlando and Atlanta were 500 teams last year,
Mm-hmm.
right? If they're healthy, I think they'll be better than 500. So that's why like I would say I can pick the over, but I don't think it'll probably be much more than like a couple of wins. And like, if it's not, like say they win like I don't know, 50 games, 49 games, they could still be a better team even if they don't win 51 games just
Mm-hmm.
because, you watch them play, look at the net rating, look at the performances. They could still be better cuz like I said, the Western Conference is tougher, the Eastern, but again, they got swept by all the top teams last year. So, if they can just not get swept by the top teams in the league, then they should be able to go over. I mean, like, because right there, like the Celtics were one of the top teams. You should be able to beat them at least 2 out of 4 times, I would think, right? Given this version of the Celtics. So like stuff like that, like that's where like yeah, I would probably take the over too.
Yeah.
Um, just one last thing. Any other things about the Knicks, or are we moving on? Like any
No.
other questions, maybe about like Deuce McBride or maybe any of the other guys?
I think we already know, who those guys are, what they bring to the table. We've seen it, for the past couple of years. So, I think the main focus was the new additions to the team, improvements, and just overall what they did this offseason. And like I
Yeah.
said, I tip my hat to them because it was not an easy situation.
Right. Yeah. All in all, like I think we both liked what the Knicks did. Now guys might be
My,
slotted into roles and positions a little bit better.
yeah,
Got a new coach. At worst should be lateral. At best could be better.
yeah.
And the Eastern Conference, the top of it is worse. So they should be primed in position for a similar type of run or better next year.
My only potential worry with them was the initial assembly of this squad felt like their job was to literally just take out Boston, and that was like their Super Bowl. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And that we've seen that kind of happen in the past couple of years, where Minnesota seemed to kind of be, assembled to take down Denver. And what happened? They did that, but then
Yeah. Then they lost to
you
Dallas and then they
flame out.
lost.
You flame out.
Yeah.
So that's my only potential problem. Like, what's the longevity of that team? But I think going into this coming season, since the East is weaker, they'll be a-okay.
But that's where like the addition of like a Yabusele helps, just because now
Yeah.
you can be a little bit more versatile and flexible. Because now it's not just all wings, and then like a few guards and a few bigs. Now you have a little bit more, like front court forward depth. That's not just 3 4s. Now you got, like I said, a 4 guy. I think that alone will help, and they still have a couple other roster spots.
Yeah.
Then moving on, we'll move to the other conference finalist team. They lost, but that's okay, and that's the Minnesota. that, just like the Knicks, they lost as well. And that's the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? Timberwolves, a little bit different of an offseason, right? So going into last year, obviously they made the big trade. Funny enough, how these two teams are connected, right? Because Towns and Randle, they were basically traded for one another. DiVincenzo comes over to the Wolves in the Knicks trade as well. And then at the beginning of the season, kind of like the Knicks, doesn't look great. They struggle early on. It's a big adjustment, a lot of different roles, a lot of guys not quite sure what they're supposed to be doing. Then they eventually figure it out. They turn it on the second half of the season. They're one of the best teams in the league. They look like the Minnesota Timberwolves again. And then they finish as the 6th seed because they bungled a couple of games right at the end, like a bunch of these other teams did. And they go into that Lakers series as an underdog once again, because for most of their time in the postseason, they've been underdogs. I think except for the Dallas series that they played in the conference finals. I think they were the favorites. I'd have to go back and look, but I think they were. But either way, they were underdogs against the Lakers. Most people picked the Lakers to win that series, us included. And then they won in 5, right? And they ended up looking like the better team. It looked like a bad matchup for the Lakers, right? The Lakers bigs, or the lack of bigs, right? Lack thereof was a real problem. Rudy Gobert had a great closeout game. And started off slow, had some really strong games in that series, right? And then they go into that Warriors series. Steph bakes him in the first quarter, then he gets hurt, and then not a whole lot of struggles after that, right? Like there were some back and forth moments, but not a whole lot to really look at in that series. Then they go into the conference finals against Oklahoma City. So after what felt like a weird regular season, they're back in the conference finals again. We thought it'd be more competitive. It wasn't. They lost in 5. There was that great game 4, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but outside of that, and I guess a few first half back and forths, right? One much to write home about in that series. But this time around for Minnesota, not really a lot that they did this offseason in terms of bringing in new guys. They lost Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but they did re-sign Naz Reid and Julius Randle to new contracts, right? I think good contracts, right? They're not really overpaid. They're, relatively reasonable deals, right? I think they're I think the Naz Reid was like 5 years, 125 or whatever, and then Julius Randle I think was 3 years and about 100 million or so.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the draft, right, they took I think what is it, Johan Berenjay? I think is how you say it, right? The
Yeah,
French
the
big
center.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah, the French big
Mm-hmm.
man. And then they also took Rocco Zakarski, right? But I think he's on a 2-way, so probably won't play a ton, but we'll see. But basically, they ran it back just minus uh Nickeil Alexander-Walker, right, who went to Atlanta in a sign and trade. So the Wolves did open up a trade exception that maybe they use at some point this upcoming season. But basically going into this year, right, I'm assuming expecting continued progress and growth from a lot of their younger guys like Jaden McDaniels, uh, like Rob Dillingham, potentially Terrence Shannon Jr., and then obviously Anthony Edwards, right? Because Ant is your franchise guy, and he's kind of like the tide that lifts all ships. And if he continues to continue to progress as a more complete player, which we've seen, right? Like his 3-point shooting's improved. Now he's a high volume 3-point guy and shoots the 3 ball very well. Added the step back 3, a little bit more up and down in the playoffs, but by and large, that area of his game has improved. His passing and playmaking has improved. His defense has improved. So he's making all the right strides and progressions that you want to see from your franchise guard. And then McDaniels, I guess with the loss of Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you're probably going to need more this season on both ends of the floor, right? Because, now, you lost a key guy that played a decent amount of minutes for you. And, McDaniels, defensively, he's fine. He does foul a lot at times, but it's the offensive end of the floor, right, where he can be a lot more up and down. And we saw stretches where he was really good on that end of the floor, and then other stretches where he was kind of invisible. It kind of depends. And, when you get that level of up and down play, sometimes that can, I think, be kind of frustrating. And then obviously, as I mentioned, they re-signed Randle and Reid, who were good for them last year, right? Randle was great for them. He was great for them, especially in the playoffs. It didn't work against Oklahoma City, but not a lot of guys played great against Oklahoma. That's one of the reasons why they lost in 5, right? And then you look around, and the other 2 guys that we mentioned, Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr., those guys are pieces because they drafted them a year ago, and now you're kind of assuming that those guys will have more opportunity, more minutes, bigger role. Terrence Shannon Jr., we actually saw play a decent chunk the latter part of the season. He even played for them in the playoffs,
Mm-hmm.
but we didn't see a whole lot of Dillingham, right? He was hurt a lot, but, and there were some stretches and flashes where you could kind of see what he could be, but he really wasn't a rotational guy for them unless people were hurt, right? Shannon Jr. kind of played his way into the rotation eventually. And, there's value there, right? As an athletic two-way guy, who's got some size and strength and can play multiple positions out there, right? Like, not really going to hurt you necessarily, right? He's kind of like a plug and play piece. So maybe he's the Nickeil Alexander-Walker replacement. And then for Dillingham, I'm curious to see how he fits in there, right? Because you look at that guard depth as a whole, and, it gets kind of dark after Ant-Man, right? Because obviously, DiVincenzo's solid, right? He played well for the Knicks and didn't play well early last season, but then got much better. And then after that, it's a bunch of guys that you're not really sure about. So, Conley, the thing with him is he's 38. He's in the last year of his deal. He looked pretty rough in that Oklahoma City series, right? Which makes sense, right? A smaller guard that doesn't have quite as much burst or physicality at this point against a big physical athletic team is just not an ideal spot to be in to have him as your starting point guard. Now, in fairness, with the strides Ant has made, you don't have to have like a traditional point guard next to him because he's improved as a decision maker. But you do, I think, ideally need somebody who can handle the ball and create some offense. And that's what the ceiling of Dillingham is supposed to be. We just don't know if he's actually going to get there. If he can pop next season, right, and give them worst case scenario, some perimeter scoring and playmaking off the bench, that's going to help him a ton, right? Because that's kind of one of the areas where they don't really have a lot of that. But, if he still is kind of just not there in year two, that's a problem, right? Like it's, even though you're kind of like, well, he was drafted top 10, so he should be a rotational guy in, last year. He wasn't. But I think now no excuses anymore because now, like I said, in year two, with some minutes opened up at that guard spot, he needs to be a consistent rotational player. Maybe he's not like a 25, 30-minute night guy, but, at least 15, 15, 20, like worst case scenario, in my opinion, he needs to be that for them, or else you have some real problems. Terrence Shannon Jr., I'm not really concerned about just because, again, I think his play is a lot more plug and play. And then could there be anyone else that could slide in? Like, the center that they drafted, right? Could he come in, say if guys are hurt, and just, he looked really good in the summer league just as a shot blocking, athletic, big presence, right? So another guy to add to your treasure trove. And especially a guy that could be a real future foundational piece, maybe, right? As he continues to develop. He's only 19, so he's still a super young guy. So, I mean, in terms of what they did this offseason, I mean, I guess I didn't really expect him to do a ton. I mean, like, the main thing was I think we figured one of the three guys that they re-signed was going to walk or go, and it was probably going to be Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So the offseason, to me, for them, went pretty much what I expected it to be. And, outside of that, you're just banking on internal development, building on what happened last year, and then kind of going from there and seeing, could you take the next step and actually come out of the Western Conference? So I don't really have any real issues with what they did. Given, like I said, I didn't expect a ton. I'd say kind of like the Knicks B+, because again, you re-sign guys back on reasonable deals, and then I liked what they did in the draft. But, I didn't really expect anything else. So, fine offseason for me. I'm just curious to see, because we've seen in recent years, right, kind of this trend of we're okay with losing some vets because we got some young guys that we're going to slide in. That hasn't worked out necessarily. So, will it work out for Minnesota? I'm not sure. But either way, Ant being as good as he is can kind of make up for it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of my logic when facing this team as well. I'd have to give them a C. Just because I think the subtractions do outweigh the additions here, right? Like you did bring in, the rookie big man. That's great for sure. I love that a lot. But losing Nickeil Alexander-Walker, I think, is a huge deal. And I know nobody really expected them to be able to keep Julius Randle, Reid, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. That's fine. This was to be expected. And I don't think the C isn't really a bad grade because it's not that I don't care about their offseason. It's more so I'm really looking at this team from an internal development lens because they have so many things that are going for them that could, be amazing if these guys can figure certain things out, right? And obviously it starts with Ant because, he's the superstar, he's their face of the franchise, and we already know he's just gotten better and better every single year. And the sky's the limit for the guy. So we already know that he's probably going to be better. Jaden McDaniels, I think we're waiting to see offensively. Can he add to his bag? That would be phenomenal. That could probably be one of the pieces that gets them over the hump. And then it's Rob Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr. Those are the two guys as well. Those are the young guys coming off the bench. Can they be spark plugs? Can Rob Dillingham hopefully potentially be the starter by the end of the season? I don't know. That's lofty expectations for one person, but I think as long as he is a key rotational piece, this team is going to be phenomenal. This is one of the teams that I do have my eye on going into next season for sure, but I don't want people to think that a C grade means that I'm low on this team at all. I'm very high on the team. I'm just looking at it from a different lens because they didn't really do a whole lot, right? All they really did was draft a guy and lose, Garza, Alexander Walker, and somebody else. I can't remember. But I think it's a good strategy to have to bank on internal development when you do have a 23-year-old superstar.
Yeah, it's a little bit different than, say, Denver and Golden State, because those guys, i.e. Jokic and Steph, are further into their careers where, not that Ant isn't like a win now player or anything, but he's still super young. So it's not like it's a disappointment if you're like, oh, Minnesota comes up short because they don't have enough, right? I think it was kind of a disappointment that they lost to the Mavs, but you're still not thinking it's the end of the world. But I get what you're saying though, where you're just thinking you don't feel like that they probably did enough to really change, drastically where they were a year ago. I just looked at it from the perspective of I didn't really, they basically did what I expected. I just didn't know who they were going to draft. And then, I think, picking a backup big, that's perfectly fine because you look at their bigs and it's Gobert is 33. So how many more years are you going to get out of him where he's still, like a high level starting center, right? It's not like his game is based on being like a super athlete or anything, but you're still kind of thinking all right, by the time his contract is over, he's got that player option in 27, 28 for 38 million, right? He's going to be 35, 36, right? And that may be past the point where you feel ideal about him being your starting center. Like I said, with Dillingham, I don't think he probably ends up being the starting point guard by the end of the season. I feel like it could just be they may just have DiVincenzo be the starting point guard if Conley can't get it done. I just don't know what I'm going to expect. Like I said, my expectation is I think he'll be like a 20-minute a game backup point guard off the bench where it's if he's hot and he's got it going, he'll play more. And if he doesn't have it, his minutes will probably be cut closer to the 15-minute per game limit. But I don't know. It's kind of funny, right? Going back to last year, because I remember, and this is why you do have to wait for stuff to change, because I remember with the Spurs, we were kind of well, why in the world, did they just basically dump Rob Dillingham to the Wolves and really got nothing back aside from, I think it was a future first. But then, boom, 1 year later, Aaron Fox, Dylan Harper, and now it's okay, well, now you don't really feel bad about not bringing in Rob Dillingham, right? And, we haven't seen enough from him to feel oh, the Spurs messed up on that one. We haven't seen enough from that point. But are you still high on Dillingham?
I'm high on his potential. I mean, I don't really know, what he is right now because we haven't. The sample size is so small, but
Right.
there are a lot of things working against him in this regard, right? You do have to weigh the positives and negatives, right? Small guard, defensive liability for sure. Definitely more of an offensive minded guy, not really a table setter, scorer, right? But I think those could be things that could be useful off the bench. But if he becomes polished, yeah, I think he could be the franchise point guard alongside Ant.
I think he has to be because, they drafted him 8th overall.
I
So
agree.
I
Yeah.
think anything less than starting caliber point guard, that'd be a major disappointment. Of course, yeah, maybe he's destined to be a backup scoring guard off the bench. I just think if you're going to draft a point guard top 10 overall, he needs to be a starting level point guard. And at a certain point, like I said, with Conley's age, you'd like to have, a backup plan just because we know you're at the point where anything could happen. Like, he's struggled really badly to begin the season, and he played better. And then against Oklahoma City, it was pretty rough, right? And it kind of looked like, hey, he might be headed closer to the end, within like by the end of this contract, rather than like, oh, he may be able to play, an extra year or whatever. I mean, he's 38, so it's not a shocker, right, that he's looking closer and closer to maybe being done. But it's funny because there were some games in the earlier series where he looked, fine, playable, but those are completely different tiers of teams, right? Like Golden State and the Lakers, just different teams, different compositions,
Mm-hmm.
different levels of athletes that you have to go against, where it's not as much of a struggle. But then it's funny, right? Because we're thinking like, well, a team like the Lakers should be able to punish Conley, and like that didn't really happen. So, we'll see what happens going forward. How do you feel about the contracts of Reid and Randle? Because, like I said, I thought that they were perfectly fine given what they are as players and what they mean to this team.
They're freaking amazing. I think the Nas Reid one is a freaking bargain. And the Julius Randle one is serviceable. I love it. Like, it doesn't really hinder the team too much. So,
Yeah, exactly. Because I think Reid starts the season at 21 million. So
yeah.
I mean, it goes up every year. So by the end of it, it's a player option for 28 million. But it's still not like a crazy amount, right? Because if this was, like a year ago or whatever, before the new CBA, he probably would have gotten more than what he ended up getting, right? But then you also factor in this was a free agency where, as we've said, not a lot of teams with cap space. So as a result, like, where's he gonna go? Like, where was he gonna go where he was gonna get, 30 plus million a year and a starting spot? Right? Like, that just wasn't gonna happen given the current environment. So I think for him, this was probably the best case scenario given what was going to be realistic, right? Because like I said, nobody was gonna open up a bunch of cap space to get Nas Reid. So I think he's perfectly fine where he is right now. Because again, like, ideally, like, I don't think you probably would love to have him as like a starting center for a championship team, but he's still going to play a ton, and there'll be many games where he will close. And I think he's still a very good big in this league and is very important to what Minnesota wants to do on both ends of the floor. So, like I said, no issues there. And Randle, he was really good for them last year.
Yeah.
Again, not a perfect player by any means, but I think as the season went on, they really figured out how to best utilize both of these guys. Because in fairness, it's a tricky pairing, and it looked pretty ugly early on, but everybody figured it out. Randle, the ball, he shot the ball much better, and he defended really well. I mean, like, there were series and stretches where, defensively he was playing with a ton of effort, used his size and his strength, to kind of be able to physically bother a number of guys. I thought, like, you got kind of the best version of him in the playoffs last year, a much better version than I think either you or I expected, right? Like, I mean, we didn't think he was going to be that good. Was crashed and burned against Oklahoma City, but not a lot of guys played great against Oklahoma City, as I said. So I guess the big question here is, so they're over under, if we're looking at the Timberwolves going into next season, 49.5. So, I mean, again, some of it depends on which one you look at, but basically they're viewed as about a 50-win team. So they won 49 games last year. So the question is, over and under.
Ooh.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, because they went 49-33 last year.
Yeah.
After
going, I think, 56 for 56 wins the year before.
Oh man, that's tough because I want to say over, but at the same time the West got so much better. And I'm very high on the team, so I'd kind of be going against my logic if I said under, but I might have to go under. The West is just that competitive. Oklahoma City will be in a league of its own. Houston will be very, very good, guaranteed. I don't know, man. I'm gonna go under.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know. I think I'm probably gonna go under too. I mean, it's hard to say just because, like you said, the Western Conference is going to be really deep. And just because, let's say they win 48, 47 games, like, that could potentially be, I mean, like, this past season, 47 wins was a play-in team. But, maybe next season, maybe 47 wins. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that could be like 5 or 6. It's hard to say because I think if you're high on Minnesota, it's kind of hard to say that, like, they're going to win significantly less than like 50 games. It's just like you said, how do you get there in the Western Conference? Because, for the teams that win around 50 games or so, right? You have the superstars, so you got that checked marked, right? You have that. You have decent depth. You have a good supporting cast. So you should be able to get somewhere around there. I don't know, because we picked under on them last year and we ended up being right. I think their over under was like around 50 or 52 or something like that. So they ended up doing worse than that. So, but again, it's like the Knicks, where it's like, I will say under, but it could easily be like 48 wins, right? Like, I don't think it's going to be much worse. Like, because once you start talking about a lot less, then you're starting to get to like 45, 44, and I think they're better than that. I think most of the non-Oklahoma City teams are going to be somewhere around 47 to like 52 wins, somewhere around that. And who gets 47 and who gets 52 is going to be dependent on like who's healthy,
Yeah.
and who ends up getting all those tiebreakers, just like last year, just like last season. I think that's where all that's going to come into. But then the final question, I guess, is how far do we think this team can go? Do we think that this team is capable of beating Oklahoma City? Do we feel like that they've addressed areas of concerns or weaknesses to make us think they can get past them? Because
No.
I would say no.
No.
Yeah, I would say no.
I mean, depending on how the internal development, thing goes, they could. I think they could. But is that super likely? No. I think their ceiling right now is going to be conference finals again. And shout out to them, because they made the conference finals back to back. So
yeah, and that's an accomplishment and an achievement that that team had not done at any point. They had not gone back to back before that. I think they had gone one time before that, and that was with Kevin Garnett. That was a while ago. So, uh, you wonder if they're maybe due for a little bit more of a down year, because it felt like it was gonna be this season, and then they still ended up getting into the conference finals. And you're not gonna make fun, not that you would, but like, you're not gonna say that it was a disappointment, because you didn't expect them to get to the conference finals in the first place, and you definitely didn't expect them to beat Oklahoma City. So that's where, if they don't get to the conference finals, I'm not going to be shocked, and I'm not going to necessarily be that disappointed. So I guess the question is that, like, if it's not Oklahoma City that's there, then I think they could have a good shot at beating those other teams. Like, I think they could do that.
yeah,
I
I
think
agree.
Oklahoma City is just a very difficult matchup. So where do you have them, in the Western Conference? Because I'd say they're definitely in the top four or so. But I think the question is, where are they in that top four? Probably not one.
No,
And I don't really think they're two either. I think they're
they're
either three
four.
or four.
They're four for
Yeah,
me, because I have Denver above them.
yeah.
Just because of the Jokic factor. But come playoff time, I think we already know Ant is one of the biggest risers in the game. So I would go fourth with them.
Yeah, I would say either three or four. And it just kind of depends on how do you feel about them versus like Denver or Houston. And like you said, I think Denver's done enough to make you feel like they should be better. Now, Denver has not matched up well against Minnesota as of, so maybe that trend continues, but Denver has improved, whereas I don't think Minnesota has. So maybe it's a matter of, maybe Denver's made enough improvements around the margins to make it so that they're not just going to get smoked by Minnesota from here on out. And then Houston's a wild card, right? Because outside of Durant, you know, we need to continue to see more growth from those younger players. Like, we already know what Durant is, even though he's an older guy. We know he's still a very good player, but we still also need to continue to see improvements from, Şengün. We need to see improvements from Amen Thompson, right? And other guys, right? Like Eason, Jabari Smith, and we'll get to Houston later on. But that's the one where I think, like, for Minnesota, it's dependent on how high you feel, like how far away do you think that they are from those other teams, right? But I'd say they're definitely a top four team, right? It's just a matter of, I think they're probably four, but I think they're much closer to Denver and Houston than they are to Oklahoma City. I can see a decent pathway for them beating Denver or Houston. I don't see a strong pathway for them beating Oklahoma City, unless they're really fortunate in terms of like injuries or something else along those lines. I don't think they have enough perimeter playmaking or talent to be able to kind of hold their own against Oklahoma City's defense. I
I
think it's
agree.
going to be a struggle for a lot of those guys. Like, Rob Dillingham, if he plays against that Oklahoma City defense, I think it might be tough. Even though he's super quick and he's a good athlete, right? It's just they have a lot of physical defenders, and I think they may be difficult for him and even Conley and some of those other guys.
Yep.
Yeah. So, is there anyone else that you would touch on this Minnesota team?
No, I mean, I think we covered the bases, right? I mean, I feel like the rookie could be interesting, right? It wasn't even um John Beringer, right? That's his
Right.
name. I think. Yeah. I mean, he could be interesting. Because I mean, center depth is very important, right? And if they do have a versatile shot blocker like that, then hey, I mean, that could really, really open up some things, for some more double big lineups for them. But I mean, overall, I think we covered all the bases. So
Yeah. Yeah. The pronunciation is Johan Beringer. So
Berenger.
that's how you
Okay.
know it. Yeah.
Thank you.
We didn't know that when he was drafted.
Yeah.
I didn't know it either, so I
Yeah.
had to look that up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, we'll see what these teams look like going into next season, but I think both of them are poised for, they should continue to be really good. So what would a disappointing year be for, either the Knicks or the Wolves?
Wolves, I would say getting bounced in the first round. Knicks, I would say probably getting bounced in the second.
Okay. So the Knicks need to make the conference finals again for win at least one playoff series.
Yep.
Okay.
That's how I would feel about it. Because the East is weak and the West is stronger. So it wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing, for the Wolves to get bounced in the second or something like that. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like Minnesota getting bounced in the second round is not the same as like Denver getting bounced in the second round, because I think you're expecting Denver to be better. They have the best player in the, one of or at least worst case scenario, one of the three best players in the game. So you feel different about them going out early than Minnesota, just because Minnesota's in this weird stretch where like they have the vets and then they have the superstar, but he's at an age where it's not really a shocker if you don't win the title. It's not a shocker if a guy in his early 20s can't win the championship, because that's not really the history of the league, right? Even with Oklahoma City, the youngest team in the league, SGA is at the age where, now you're at that point where you're entering your prime and you're ready to be able to win a championship. It's just a matter of if we're the other guys ready, and they ended up being that. Minnesota, outside of Ant, right, they don't have, those other guys that are like, 21, 20. I mean, McDaniels is a similar age. But some of the Dillingham's not there yet. Whatever the best version of him is, we're not going to see that.
Right.
So, yeah. So, I guess moving on. After that, again, let us know your thoughts in the comments about what you think of those teams as off seasons and what you expect, from those teams moving forward, right? Because I think those are going to be two of the better teams in the league, but not really a whole lot at this point really to discuss. We did have a couple of things. I guess we had the Bulls extending their head coach Billy Donavan, so they gave him a multi-year extension according to Shams Charania. So the Bulls been a mediocre team for a while. He's been the coach there for a while, so it's a match made in heaven. I don't think he's a terrible coach or anything, and they've had a couple of like towards the end of last year they looked good, then they fell apart in the play-in. But the Bulls, it's just hard to talk about because it's like they have some players that are interesting, but outside of that, you don't feel like talking about them for a long time, because we know once again the Bulls are going to be somewhere around where they were last year, a mediocre team in the Eastern Conference where the ceiling is like, hooray, like you're a better play-in team than some of the other play-in teams, but then not really, because they haven't even won the only play-in game that I think they won was the first year we did the podcast in 23 when they beat the Raptors. Outside of that, they've been just kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be. It's the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah, exactly.
But what do you? But I guess, what do you think of the extension? Like, are you like in the mindset of like it's fine? You don't really care. You wish they had a different coach, because it's just kind of hard to say, because it's like, I mean, I haven't seen a whole lot from the Bulls, so it's like when they're in this realm of being just mediocre, I don't really feel like a better coach is going to make that better, right?
Yeah,
So
the coach isn't the
guess,
problem. I can tell you that right now. It's more so front office and decisions and lack of direction. Like you said, they have some interesting players, but I think he's done a good job maximizing those guys, right? Like I don't think Kobe White's, ascendance happens without, Billy Donovan and stuff like that. I think Mataz, he looks like he could be potentially pretty promising as well. So they have some good things going on there. They're just in purgatory.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point where we're like right now we're just kind of like you said just waiting to see what happens with that, but it's fine. There's not really a whole lot to say about that, but it is what it is, but we do have to talk about it. We're at the point where there's not a whole lot of other things to discuss. So now we'll close it out like we usually do, with our IG polls. And actually, we also have a comment to read. So I guess we'll start off with the comment. And the comment comes from Ron Alderson 8. And he mentions good video, guys. Yes, the Thunder are the favorites next season. The Nuggets are probably their biggest threat in the West. Despite losing Turner and Halliburton, the Pacers probably still find a way to remain competitive between seeds 5 through 10. And then there are rumors that they're searching for a veteran guard in this market. So this came from our last, not short, but our last episode in which we discussed Oklahoma City and Indiana's offseason. So pretty much I don't really have an issue with anything he said. I think pretty much I agree with everything that he said. I think the main thing is that like for the Pacers, I think they'll probably be closer to bottom half of the bracket in the Eastern Conference if they get in there. Like, the East is bad, so they could still be like, between 7 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'd be hard for them to get a top 5, 6 seed because I just think the Hawks and the Magic should be better than Indiana unless there's, bad injury luck again, which could happen because those teams do have those type of guys. But pretty much everything he said by and large, like I agree with.
Yeah, me too. I agree. Indiana will probably take a step back. You'll probably see them maybe 6, 7 seed, maybe. That's what I would kind of, peg them as. But yeah, overall, great comment. Very, very, very insightful for sure.
Yeah. And then in our last IG poll, we asked the question, will KC repeat? And that ties again to our last episode that we did about their offseason. And 67%, 2/3 of the responses said yes, they will. Right. And I think you've already basically so now you basically have like your matchup because you said you think the Knicks will make the finals, but I think you said last episode you got OKC repeating. So I guess you got Oklahoma City over the Knicks. So you already have your matchup planned out. Of course, it could change.
Yeah.
Maybe something else happens this offseason that could change your mind. But right now you're leaning towards Oklahoma City repeats.
Yeah, at the moment. We'll see once we do our predictions, we'll see if it stands.
Right.
But at the moment, nothing set in stone, nothing concrete. But as far as I'm looking at it on paper, yeah, OKC's got this one by a mile.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like you said, I'm not making a pick yet because we don't, especially because we don't have to do it. But I like OKC's chances of going back to back. But there is a reason why nobody's done it in a while, and so history isn't necessarily on their side. But I think they have the talent and upside to be able to do it. But they need to remain healthy. But we'll see. But let us know your thoughts in the comments on, as I already mentioned, the Knicks and the Wolves off seasons and how far you think they could go. Let us know your thoughts on what we just discussed about Oklahoma City and their chances of repeating. If you want to join in on these polls, you can just go on our IG at the OBT podcast and you can respond. We always put them up usually as our episodes come out. And of course, you can leave comments on our YouTube shorts or our normal videos or our other socials, again at the OBT podcast, and continue to like and subscribe to help the channel grow. We appreciate all the support. We'll see you next episode.